So obviously I could ramble on and on about the benefits of playing tennis, but to get an honest perspective of the experience that you get with tennis, I decided to go to my local tennis courts to interview some people. I asked these players 3 questions regarding how tennis has impacted their life, as well as questions regarding racial and financial discrimination in tennis. So let's take a look at what they had to say.
In a very good way. I actually only started playing 3 years ago because my son brought home a flyer in middle school about a tennis camp. He didn't want to do it by himself, so I decided to do it with him, and that's how I actually started playing. It has allowed me to lose some weight and maintain a much fitter state, if you will, since I started playing, so very positive impact.
Tennis, for me, has been like a way for me to relax. I guess it's given me, like, tennis is my biggest sport. I've played other sports too, but this is like the only one where I've been able to, show my own achievements, I guess. So, I don't know, it showed me kind of like a way.
Me active. It gives me exercise every day, and it makes me happy. And I got to meet with my friends. Yeah, that's all.
Tennis has changed my life. I accidentally came across it, and ever since then I just really fell in love, and it's really a sport that you can play for life. I didn't learn when I was young, so I'm kind of doing it backwards. I learned as an adult, and I imagine I'm going to be going the opposite way on the slope, like gaining more skills as time goes on. So it's really given me something to drive for, and my goal is to play an international tournament.
I think tennis impacted my life because it helped me become more active in playing, and then I also learned a lot of life goals and what I want to do in the future because of tennis.
I do think there are barriers, but that was only observed as a spectator. I used to watch the sport for all the years that I wasn't playing, and I noticed that there were very few minorities that play the sport. Of course, a lot of that changed when the likes of Serena Williams and Venus Williams started playing the sport. That actually got me more interested in the sport. I think that's very important for the sport to grow, is that it should attract people of all walks of life, all shades of color. So it hasn't affected me personally because I only started playing a few years ago, but I don't think I would have an interest in playing if it weren't for the likes of the Williams sisters and other minorities that excel in the sport.
I don't know, it's hard for me to say that because tennis for me is just based off of how you play. And so, I mean, race doesn't affect how you play. If it comes to how people perceive you and how they might underestimate you or overestimate you, that's a huge factor. Race is a huge factor in that. But I mean, it doesn't affect your outcomes because in the end you're going to be able to prove your worth kind of and how well you're doing. I think some people might have underestimated me, but yeah, I mean, it hasn't really affected me that much.
For me, I don't think it's racial barriers that affect tennis. For me, I just was never exposed to it when I was younger, so I think it was more of making it more of a mainstream sport. I played basketball when I was in high school, so I think if it's introduced more to everyone, then that's kind of the thing. I think it's an expensive sport, so maybe it wouldn't necessarily be race, but more money that might impact whether you're able to continue training.
I feel like there's racial barriers in tennis and just in general in our society, but in tennis I think I've been affected by racial barriers because it's stereotypical for Asians to play tennis, I guess, and because of that they assume because you're Asian you can play tennis better than other people.
I do think so. I migrated to this country from Jamaica, so this may not be specific to the US, but I know growing up there, it wasn't even an option for me because we couldn't afford to go to tennis camps or to go to tennis clubs and so forth. Migrating to the US, being successful here financially, that's less of an issue, but I know for a fact that it is a costly sport to pick up and maintain. But it's becoming more and more affordable, I think, in areas like this where NISD has done a great job in making facilities available to the public. So you don't have to have a club membership to play the sport, you just have to be able to afford the gear. So that's a significant help in overcoming some of the financial barriers that you have in tennis. The gear is not cheap. Rackets are not cheap. The proper clothing is not cheap. So it is a factor, but it hasn't really affected me that much.
Yes, there are definitely financial barriers in tennis. Tennis is an expensive sport. I mean, to get better, then you need tutors, you need equipment, rackets, and then clothing, and balls. And even though these might seem like superficial, they're they impact how much, I guess, you can get better. So yeah, I would definitely say that they're barriers, financial barriers. For me, I've been like blessed with a financially stable family. So I mean, it really hasn't affected me. And again, I'm really blessed for that, but yeah.
I grew up in India, so we didn't have all these facilities to play tennis, but definitely the financial status of the family definitely affects it. I mean, if you're not in a neighborhood which doesn't have all these facilities, definitely you will not play or you will not show any interest. After coming here, there were a lot of facilities where I can play tennis.
So that benefited you?
Yes,
and your
it
family?
definitely, yeah.
I do think tennis is an expensive sport. You know, I think there's a lot of programs now that do help people that, or especially like kids that don't have the financial means. For me, I mean, it's affected me because if I had all the money in the world, I'd be training every day with the coach, but here I am playing instead.
To some extent, I think there are financial barriers because if you don't have the better racket or you don't have the better shoes, if you don't have the money for that, then that might affect your performance, but that's only up to a certain extent because you can still do what you can, like use the most of your money basically. And that, so to some extent that does affect you, but overall that shouldn't really be a deciding factor on whether you like tennis or not and your skills.